You stand at the edge of a world still trembling from the echoes of a global war, both magical and muggle. And you can almost smell the smoke of cities that never quite healed. The year is 1945, or what's left of it, and somewhere in the dark corners of Europe, a man named Gellert Grindelwald is still being hunted. Have you ever wondered what it truly means for a wizard to believe he's saving the world while tearing it apart? That's where tonight's story begins, with the kind of conviction that could ignite continents. The air feels heavy, like old parchment soaked in rain, and the rumors are impossible to ignore. Grindelwald's followers, the so-called acolytes of the greater good, are still at large. Even as their leader prepares for a final confrontation he's long postponed. You follow whispers through war-torn villages, through shattered halls where spells once danced like fireworks, and you realize something uncanny. No one quite agrees on who Gellert Grindelwald really was. To some, he's a revolutionary who dared to dream beyond borders. To others, he's a tyrant who cloaked genocide in philosophy. And to one man in particular, Albus Dumbledore, he's something far more complicated. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm really curious, from which part of the world are you watching this video? Write your country in the comments. Let's see how far this little story has traveled. You walk through a ruined German town where the walls still hum faintly with residual magic. The shop signs have been blasted away, but one crooked wooden beam bears a faded inscription, Für das größere Wohl, for the greater good. It's almost poetic, in that eerie way history tends to be. The phrase still carries a chill, like a curse too grand to die. Somewhere, scholars still debate whether Grindelwald's earliest actions were rooted in genuine idealism or something darker, a kind of spiritual hunger disguised as leadership. One academic even claimed his speeches mirrored real-world demagogues of the 1930s, blending charisma and terror into a single intoxicating potion. You pause beside a collapsed bell tower, the ground littered with broken glass and forgotten spells, and wonder whether every age breeds its own kind of magician. The ones who claim they're building paradise but always seem to start with a prison. A flicker of movement catches your eye, a memory charm unraveling in the air, like the ghost of a forgotten witness. The whispers rise, rumors of a duel yet to come, one so fierce that the earth itself remembers where it happened. You probably won't survive knowing what really went on that day. But don't worry, you're safe here, for now. As night falls, a faint light glimmers far away, somewhere over the black forest, where two old friends are destined to meet. And that's where our journey begins. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trace the story backward, through misty years and dim corridors of memory, until you find yourself in Godric's Hollow, where cobblestones glisten under moonlight, and the air smells faintly of wet earth and chimney smoke. It's hard to imagine that this quiet English village once nurtured two of the most brilliant minds in wizarding history. One destined to save, the other to destroy. You walk past the Potter cottage long before its tragedy and come to a different house, quieter, lonelier, where a pale-haired boy dreams of remaking the world. Gellert Grindelwald is 16, maybe 17, already expelled from Durmstrang for twisted experiments, though no one can quite agree on what those were. Some say he tried to open a window into death itself. Others whisper about runes carved into flesh, his own or another's, depending on who's telling the tale. But beneath every rumor lies a simple truth. He was brilliant beyond his years, and brilliance untethered from empathy is always dangerous. You follow him through the graveyard behind the church, where he sketches circles and sigils in the dirt, muttering about balance, destiny, and something he calls the master plan. There's something magnetic about him, even in silence. A historical footnote later describes him as a mind too large for the age that bore it, which sounds flattering until you remember that the same could be said of volcanoes. He's soon joined by another boy, dark-haired, bright-eyed, cautious but curious, Albus Dumbledore. Their friendship begins like all great tragedies do, with shared dreams and unspoken fears. You listen to their voices through the summer air, talk of wizardkind's destiny, the folly of secrecy, and how perhaps, if guided by the right people, magic could rule benevolently over the Muggle world. For the greater good, Gellert murmurs, and Albus nods. You can almost see it, the spark of utopia, the shadow of tyranny disguised as light. One fringe historian once suggested that Grindelwald's earliest philosophies were inspired by Muggle political movements of the early 20th century, blending mystical hierarchy with social reform, a chilling mix of Plato and propaganda. Another scholar, less charitable, called it magical fascism with a romantic accent. You can't help but smirk. Academia does have its flair for understatement. But in this moment, it's just two boys dreaming of perfection. You feel the thrill of it, the naive beauty of believing the world can be repaired if you just rearrange its rules. Yet somewhere beneath, something darker stirs. Grindelwald isn't content with theories. He craves proof. Late one night, he experiments with binding charms so intricate that even seasoned wizards would hesitate. The earth itself seems to hum in response. It can all be fixed, he says. They just need someone brave enough to act. You feel a cold wind rush through the hollow, as if the village itself knows what's coming. You want to warn them, to tell them that every great reformer of history, magical or not, eventually discovers that, for the greater good, always means for my version of it. But history doesn't listen. It only repeats. Somewhere, a clock strikes midnight, and a storm begins to gather. You step into that fateful summer when everything changes. The summer when dreams ignite and burn too bright to last. The air in Godric's Hollow feels electric, the hedgerows alive with whispering insects and distant thunder. Albus and Gellert spend every waking hour together, their friendship a fever that blurs day and night, laughter and obsession. You watch them hunched over parchment maps scattered with ink and candle wax, arguing over the placement of magical borders and the rights of wizards to rule. Dumbledore, always the philosopher, insists that love must guide power. Grindelwald, always the visionary, insists that love must sometimes step aside for progress. It's intoxicating to watch them, two prodigies feeding off one another's brilliance, neither realizing that they are building the kind of idea that history later files under too dangerous to discuss. One curious scholar once compared their partnership to the relationship between Goethe and his dark muse, intellectual, poetic, and doomed from the start. Another fringe writer went further, suggesting that their connection was as much emotional as ideological, that Grindelwald's magnetism was not just persuasive, but personal. The truth, as always, floats somewhere in the gray between admiration and longing. You can sense it in the way Dumbledore's eyes linger too long when Gellert laughs, or the way Gellert's voice softens when he calls him my equal. The two of them spend nights discussing the fabled Deathly Hallows, ancient relics said to make one the master of death. It sounds like myth, But you've heard enough bedtime stories to know that myth has a way of creeping into reality. One humid evening, under a flickering lamp, they decide to seal their pact, not with words, but with blood. You watch as Gellert draws a thin silver blade, murmuring something in Old Norse, and Albus hesitates only a heartbeat before pressing his hand to the blade's edge. The drops sizzle as they fall, vanishing into the air with a faint hiss, leaving behind a faint scar that glows when the moonlight touches it. The blood pact is more than a promise. It's a curse dressed as devotion, a binding that will make any future betrayal a mortal act. You feel your stomach tighten as the candle gutters. Even the flame seems uneasy. From that night onward, their plans grow sharper, more dangerous. They talk of overthrowing the international statute of secrecy, of uniting wizards under one flag, of eliminating the chaos of ignorance. Grindelwald calls it mercy. Dumbledore calls it destiny. You might call it delusion, but you'd whisper it quietly. By late August, the world begins to intrude. Albus's brother Aberforth confronts them, demanding that they stop before they destroy everything their family stands for. The argument turns violent. Wands flash, spells crackle, and in the chaos, a scream splits the air. Their sister Ariana, caught between them, falls lifeless. It's the kind of silence that never fades. History books summarize it in one neat line: an accident resulting in the tragic death of Ariana Dumbledore. But you stand here and see what the parchment cannot capture. The horror on Albus's face, the trembling in Grindelwald's hand, the look of someone realizing that the dream has already turned to ash. Without a word, Gellert flees that very night, leaving Godric's Hollow behind, but not the scar that still burns beneath his skin. And just like that, idealism becomes exile, friendship becomes guilt, and the fire they started will smolder for decades. You reappear decades later, and Europe has changed. Its cities hum with tension, its governments rebuild, and its wizards hide behind treaties pretending that peace is permanent. Somewhere, in the heart of this fragile continent, Gellert Grindelwald resurfaces, not as a fugitive, but as a prophet. You find him standing atop the marble stairs of a grand hall in the Austrian Alps, his voice echoing through a crowd of thousands. His hair is silver now, slicked back like a storm held at bay. His wand a conductor's baton for a symphony of belief. His speeches are mesmerizing, laced with the rhythms of ancient runes and modern rhetoric. He speaks of freedom, unity, and a world where magic no longer cowers in shadows. Wizards should not hide, he says, his tone soft and paternal, when the lesser world needs our guidance. The crowd erupts, not in fear but in applause. It's easy to see why they follow him. He's everything a weary people crave after chaos: order, vision, and certainty. One historian later noted that Grindelwald's rise eerily paralleled the ascent of real-world leaders of the 1920s. Charismatic, idealistic, terrifyingly organized. He doesn't conquer through curses, he conquers through charm. His symbol, the Deathly Hallows, appears on banners, rings, even children's toys, its meaning diluted and sanctified all at once. You watch him establish his base in Nurmengard, an obsidian fortress carved from a mountainside, equal parts monastery and prison. The locals whisper that the stones themselves hum when he passes, that the walls remember every word he speaks. For the greater good becomes law, etched into every doorway, embroidered on every uniform. Yet for all the grandeur, something unnervingly human lingers in him, a flicker of regret, or perhaps longing. A rare journal entry from one of his followers records him standing alone at dawn, staring at the mountains and muttering a single name: Albus. You wonder if he's haunted by the duel that never happened, or by the love that did. There's a fringe theory, wild of course, that claims Grindelwald's mastery of persuasion wasn't entirely magical, but rooted in an ancient charm developed from Vila ancestry, his blood carrying a subtle enchantment of fascination. Scholars debate it endlessly, as scholars do, but whatever the truth, you can feel it even now. His presence is gravitational. He gathers ministers, professors, and outcasts alike, convincing them that their cause is divine. Soon, his greater good becomes justification for arresting dissenters, purging impurity, reshaping the wizarding world into his image. You walk through his growing empire and can't help but notice how quiet everything feels. No laughter, no doubt, only obedience disguised as peace. Yet even as his power swells, so does a shadow on the horizon. Rumors spread of another wizard, one who once shared his dream but now hides behind school walls, waiting for a day he hopes will never come. Albus Dumbledore. Grindelwald pretends indifference, but his voice wavers when the name surfaces in conversation, like an old wound reopening. You can almost hear him whisper, "He'll come for me when he's ready." And perhaps that's what he's truly waiting for. Not victory, but closure. You find yourself standing before the black stone gates of Nurmengard, the citadel that Gellert Grindelwald built not as a refuge but as a monument to his own contradictions. The fortress rises like a jagged scar against the gray sky, carved with runes that pulse faintly, as if alive. The air smells of cold iron and candle smoke, of secrets preserved too long. Inside, the walls are polished obsidian, each reflection a distorted echo of the faces that once believed in him. At first glance, it looks like a temple of peace. Banners with the Deathly Hallows symbol hang beside golden torches, and soft choral music drifts through the halls. But listen closer, and you'll hear it. The quiet sobs of prisoners echoing from the lower chambers, the heartbeat of an empire built on fear. You descend the spiral staircase, your footsteps barely audible over the hum of magic. The cells are lined with runic inscriptions meant to suppress spellcasting, though a few prisoners still whisper incantations to themselves, more habit than hope. Grindelwald walks past them daily, hands clasped behind his back, offering calm nods as if greeting colleagues, not captives. To him, they're not enemies. They're unfortunate visionaries who lacked discipline. One historian once called Nurmengard the most elegant tyranny ever constructed, and he wasn't wrong. There are libraries here, vast ones, where books on ethics sit beside treatises on domination, where compassion and cruelty are debated like academic theories. You can almost picture Grindelwald hosting salons, lecturing his inner circle about mercy as an act of strength, and occasionally laughing at the irony. He truly believes that he's curing the world. "Discipline brings harmony," he says to a young recruit, his tone soft but absolute. Without order, freedom devours itself, and the recruit nods, because when Gellert Grindelwald speaks, even reason listens. A peculiar scholar once theorized that the fortress's very geometry was enchanted to reinforce belief, that the curves of its corridors were mathematically aligned with persuasion spells, subtly bending thought like light through glass. It sounds absurd, but standing here, you start to feel it. The strange calm, the dangerous clarity. You understand how a person might begin to agree with him, at least for a moment. But not all of his followers are true believers. Some are frightened. Some simply admire the power. And one, Vinda Rosier, his lieutenant, fears what happens when their leader starts to waver. Late at night, she finds him in the tower's highest chamber, staring at a fragment of parchment sealed behind glass, the remnants of a blood pact. His fingers trace the edge of the case, and he whispers something like a prayer. You realize then that the fortress isn't just a prison for others. It's a prison for him. Every hallway reflects his guilt. Every candle burns with regret disguised as purpose. You step closer, and the walls seem to pulse with his thoughts. I was right, wasn't I? I had to be. The softest joke of all? The fortress meant to cage rebellion will one day cage its creator. History always has a sense of humor that way. You walk beside Albus Dumbledore now, through the echoing corridors of Hogwarts, where laughter from students hides the low murmur of unease. The war outside is no longer avoidable. Grindelwald's shadow stretches across continents, and even the portraits on the walls seem to hold their breath. Dumbledore moves slower these days, his once quick hands now trembling when they reach for a teacup. He tells himself that time will bring clarity, that perhaps Gellert will tire of conquest. But deep down, he knows the truth. He's waiting. Waiting because of a promise sealed in blood. Waiting because of guilt heavier than prophecy. You can almost feel the weight in his chest when he opens a drawer and sees the silver vial that holds the memory of Ariana's death, shimmering like liquid sorrow. We were young, he murmurs once to McGonagall, who pretends not to notice the tremor in his voice. We believed the world could be rearranged like furniture. It's the kind of line that history professors love to quote centuries later. But the truth is, he's terrified, not of Grindelwald's power, but of what killing him might confirm, that love and violence can share the same hand. He spends years dodging the inevitable, throwing himself into schoolwork, championing tolerance, teaching transfiguration to distract himself from transformation of another kind. And yet, the letters arrive. First from European ministries pleading for help, then from old friends, then from no one at all, because there's no one left to write. One old wizarding journal, half banned in most libraries, claimed that Dumbledore once visited a secret council in Paris disguised as a Muggle professor to discuss ethical retaliation. The fringe claim is that he argued not for victory but for containment, suggesting that to destroy Grindelwald would erase a part of our own soul. Scholars still argue what he meant by that. Some say it was poetic cowardice, others that it was mercy beyond human comprehension. But Dumbledore's nights are sleepless. In the quiet of his study, the blood pact glows faintly in its glass prison, responding to every surge of guilt. He has studied every possible loophole, every counter-curse, every forbidden art that might let him confront Gellert without breaking his oath. Nothing works. Sometimes, he catches his reflection in the mirror and barely recognizes the man looking back. Older, lonelier, surrounded by the ghosts of choices deferred. Yet fate doesn't ask permission. When news comes that Grindelwald's armies have razed another magical village, half wizards, half muggles, Albus finally closes the book he's been pretending to read for years. He walks out to the astronomy tower, where the night air bites at his face, and looks toward the distant lights over Germany. It's time, he whispers, and the wind seems to nod. Somewhere, far away, Grindelwald turns suddenly in his chair, as though he's heard it too. Destiny has the strange courtesy of giving old friends one last chance to finish their conversation. You drift through the final days before the duel, and the whole world feels like it's holding its breath. The Muggle War is ending, but in the hidden corners of Europe, wizards sense another kind of reckoning approaching. A quieter, older one that will never make the newspapers, but will change everything. Grindelwald's forces are scattered now. The banners that once fluttered proudly across strongholds in Switzerland, Austria, and Prague hang limp, stained by smoke. Even his most loyal followers whisper doubts when they think he cannot hear. Yet Gellert himself seems untouched by despair. In Nurmengard's highest tower, he stands before an enormous window, tracing his reflection in the glass, as if searching for the boy he once was. "He'll come," he says softly. He always does. His eyes gleam, not with fear, but anticipation. One historian called it a moment of calm insanity, the stillness of a man who knows his empire is dying but wants to choreograph its final act. Another writer, fringe but fascinating, proposed that Grindelwald may have invited his downfall deliberately, that his final messages to his officers contained riddles meant to stall resistance. Was he surrendering or staging redemption? The debate still divides magical scholars. You make your way through the fortress as night falls, hearing the distant crackle of rebel skirmishes. Lightning flickers along the horizon, painting the mountains in fleeting silver. Somewhere beyond the clouds, a phoenix cries, a sound both mournful and defiant. And there he is, Albus Dumbledore, arriving not with an army but alone, cloak soaked from rain, wand glowing faintly at his side. The guards step aside, not out of loyalty but reverence. History has already chosen its ending. You follow him into the grand hall, where every candle burns steady, defying the storm outside. Grindelwald waits by the window, hands folded, a faint smile curling at his lips. "So it's true," he says. "No, you couldn't stay away forever." Dumbledore's voice is low, cracked by time and guilt. "You gave me no choice." Their words drift through the chamber like incantations, heavy with everything unsaid: love, betrayal, regret. The blood pact between them pulses faintly, visible now like molten silver threading through the air. Neither moves for a long while. It's strange, this quiet before the cataclysm. You feel the pressure of history compressing into a single instant. The way wars, ideologies, and lifetimes always do when reduced to two people who once believed they could save the world together. You notice Grindelwald's wand hand trembling, not with weakness, but restraint. "We were right," he murmurs. "The world is broken." "But not for us to fix," Dumbledore replies. Their eyes meet, and the room itself seems to inhale. Outside, thunder roars, answering the call. Some say they spoke no spells, that their magic recognized each other instinctively. Twin forces colliding after years of avoidance. Others claim the duel raged for hours, tearing through the sky like the storm of the century. The truth, as usual, lies somewhere between miracle and myth. But as you stand there, feeling the first ripple of energy shake the walls, you realize this isn't a battle for victory. It's a confession disguised as combat. You stand at the edge of the storm itself now, the duel that the world still argues about, the moment that defines both men forever. The air around Nurmengard shivers as if the mountain is alive, and lightning dances between clouds that don't obey natural law. The stones beneath your feet hum with ancient resonance. Even time seems to hesitate, unsure whether to proceed or look away. Dumbledore and Grindelwald circle each other in silence, two old friends whose every glance carries decades of memory, betrayal, and something that still feels alarmingly like affection. Neither speaks the first word of magic. It happens the way breathing happens, instinctively. Sparks erupt in arcs of gold and violet. the kind of color that only exists when grief and power meet halfway. You feel the pressure in your chest, as if the air itself is being pulled apart by loyalty and regret. Grindelwald moves first, his wand slashing the air in a wide, elegant arc. The spell he casts isn't meant to kill, it's meant to convince. Ribbons of silver light twist toward Dumbledore, each whispering in voices only he can hear. You loved me once. You believed in me. Why destroy that? Dumbledore counters with a single motion, wordless, his magic glowing blue-white, pure and quiet like moonlight on snow. When the two forces collide, the sound is not thunder. It's music, low and sorrowful, the echo of a friendship breaking in half. Somewhere in the distance, Phoenix fire bursts across the clouds. No one knows how long the duel lasts. Some say minutes, others claim hours. One account, written years later by a terrified witness hidden in the hills, describes the sky turning inside out, constellations rearranging themselves in the heat of the clash. A more skeptical scholar suggests the magic merely disrupted the local geomagnetic field, but even he admits something unquantifiably divine occurred. You watch Grindelwald grow desperate, his movements sharper, almost pleading now. He conjures illusions of the world he promised, cities floating in peace, muggles and wizards walking side by side, the golden utopia he once described to Albus under the summer trees of Godric's Hollow. It's still possible, he shouts, voice cracking under the roar of collapsing stone. We can fix it all, together. Dumbledore hesitates, and for an instant you think he might believe him. But then the blood pact glows violently, reacting to their proximity, the silvery chains writhing between them like living things. It's a beautiful, terrible sight. Two souls tethered by love and law, forced to destroy what they built. Dumbledore whispers something too soft to hear, raises his wand, and the world folds in on itself. Light consumes everything, not blinding but cleansing, and when the radiance fades, Grindelwald is on his knees. His wand lies broken beside him, smoking faintly. He looks up at Albus and smiles, not cruelly, but with a serenity that chills you. You were always the best of us, he says, and there's something almost grateful in the way he surrenders. Dumbledore doesn't answer. He just steps forward, places a hand on his old friend's shoulder, and the fortress falls silent. Later, generations will fill the gaps with poetry and theory, some insisting Grindelwald fell unconscious, others that he willingly laid down his wand. A few radicals claim the duel was never about dominance at all, but about two souls unbinding a curse together, an act of mutual release rather than destruction. Whatever the truth, you can feel it in your bones. The war ended not with a victory, but with an understanding too costly to speak aloud. When Dumbledore walks away, the storm finally stops. Rain begins to fall, washing the ash from the air, and the wind carries away the last echo of Grindelwald's voice. The greatest duel of the age ends not in triumph, but in silence. Two ghosts departing the stage, leaving history to argue over who was right. You walk through the quiet aftermath, when all the noise of battle has drained from the world, leaving only the low hum of rain against stone. Nurmengard stands changed, not destroyed, but humbled. The once gleaming banners have fallen, their symbols dim and forgotten, and the great black gates hang open as if exhausted by purpose. You step inside and see Dumbledore alone in the grand hall, wand still faintly glowing, his robes soaked through. Grindelwald lies where he fell, breathing, conscious, eyes open to the ruined ceiling above him. You could have killed me, he whispers, his voice fragile but steady. I did, Dumbledore replies, his tone soft as dust. Just not the way you wanted. For a moment, neither of them moves. The silence is unbearable. Two men who once built the same dream, now staring at what's left of it. Dumbledore turns away first, knowing that history must be allowed to reshape this moment into something comprehensible, something less tragic. When he leaves, he seals the fortress not with triumph, but with pity. Grindelwald's punishment is to live in the prison he created, a monument to his own undoing. Years pass. The world rebuilds, forgets, moves on. The International Confederation of Wizards erases his name from official records. Schools stop teaching his ideas, as if silence could sterilize memory. And yet, you know how history works. It never truly buries what it fears. Fringe movements still arise decades later, claiming that Grindelwald's greater good was misinterpreted, that his vision was noble but sabotaged. Magical historians dismiss these revisionists, but their persistence proves something chilling. Ideas, unlike wizards, don't die. In his cell atop Normangard, Grindelwald grows thinner, quieter. He spends his days reading old Muggle philosophy texts, perhaps to remind himself that the world beyond magic existed before and will exist after him. Sometimes he speaks to the empty air, as if addressing someone unseen. You were right, Albus, he says once, and his voice catches. Love is the only magic worth mastering. It's not recorded in any official document, of course, only whispered by the one guard who claims to have overheard it before disappearing from service. Another rumor, perhaps, or a truth too fragile for paper. Meanwhile, Dumbledore carries the victory like a burden. The public celebrates him as a savior, but he never attends the ceremonies. When reporters press him about the duel, he answers only, "It was long overdue." His eyes, though, always drift toward the mountains. One academic debate, one of those endless scholarly quarrels, centers on whether Dumbledore's refusal to execute Grindelwald was mercy or cowardice. Some call it proof of his moral superiority. Others, an admission that love and justice can never coexist without compromise. You suspect he'd agree with both. What he did that day wasn't forgiveness. It was acceptance that not every wrong can be undone, only outlived. The irony, of course, is that Grindelwald's own fortress becomes his eternal cage, a poetic symmetry that future writers can't resist romanticizing. One essay calls it a victory written in lowercase letters. You think that's exactly right. There's no grandeur left here, only the faint, echoing question that refuses to fade. If you had the power to remake the world, would you trust yourself enough to try? Outside, the seasons shift over Normangard. Snow falls on the parapets. The mountains reclaim their silence. And deep within the tower, an old man with hollow eyes closes his book, leans against the wall, and smiles faintly to no one in particular. Somewhere, in another time, a phoenix lets out a quiet cry, part mourning, part forgiveness. The legend of Gellert Grindelwald doesn't end with fire, but with a sigh. You return one last time to Normangard, though decades have passed and the world outside barely remembers its name. The fortress no longer hums with magic. It merely creaks like an old house full of ghosts. The iron doors are rusted, the banners turn to dust, and ivy creeps along the stones that once carried the weight of a revolution. Inside, the corridors smell of parchment, candle wax, and rainwater leaking through old cracks. Grindelwald is an old man now, white-haired, thin as parchment, his eyes clouded but sharp. He spends his days writing on the walls with the stub of a charmed quill. notes that fade and reappear depending on the light. "The world needed order," one line reads, "but not mine." You sit in the corner and listen to him mutter to himself, a voice both frail and oddly calm. He no longer talks about the greater good, or about conquest, or destiny. He talks about birds, about how he misses seeing them through open windows. There's something almost kind about him now, which somehow makes it worse. When the guards bring him food, he thanks them with quiet dignity, and they, uneasy, pretend not to feel pity. Some say Dumbledore visited him once more before the end, though the records are silent on it. A few scholars insist there's no proof. Others argue that the sudden calm in Grindelwald's final months could only mean reconciliation. A lesser-known theory claims they didn't speak at all, that Dumbledore merely stood outside his cell for an hour, tracing the faded blood mark on his palm, and then left without a word. The truth is unknowable, but the story persists, passed between historians like a fragile relic. What we do know is that when another dark wizard came searching years later, a man with snake-pale skin and a name whispered like a curse, Grindelwald refused to help him. "You will not find what you seek," he told Voldemort, laughing softly. "Death does not serve you." It was his last act of defiance, or perhaps his first act of redemption. Either way, when Voldemort struck him down, Grindelwald didn't flinch. He had already spent a lifetime dying. After his death, Nurmengard was abandoned. The Ministry debated whether to demolish it, but they decided against it, perhaps out of superstition, perhaps respect. Instead, it stands untouched, a monument to ambition and its consequences. Over the years, moss grows over the engravings, and travelers sometimes claim to hear faint whispers inside, as if the stones are rehearsing their memories. On clear nights, the aurora sometimes glimmers above the mountain, green and silver, and villagers say, that's the souls of the fallen wizards finally finding peace. You stand outside the ruins, feeling the wind tug at your cloak, and think about how every generation builds its own Nurmengard, its own fortress of ideals, beautiful until it hardens. Maybe that's the true curse of brilliance, to believe too strongly that the world must be corrected. As you turn away, the story softens. The snow begins to fall, gentle and soundless, wrapping the mountain in white. You imagine Dumbledore years later, standing by the fire at Hogwarts, his gaze far away, still seeing the face of the friend he once couldn't save. You imagine Grindelwald, once the brightest comet in the magical sky, reduced to a whisper of light fading into morning. The world they shaped keeps turning, ordinary, peaceful, imperfect, perhaps exactly as it should be. And now, as the candles burn low and your eyes grow heavy, you feel the hush settle in, the kind that comes after long stories and longer regrets. The wind hums softly against the window, and the world outside seems smaller, kinder, quieter. Whatever you believe about Gellert Grindelwald, monster, visionary, lover, fool, it doesn't matter anymore. His war is over. His silence is the lesson. So breathe in, deeply. Let the noise of the day fall away. The stones of Nurmengard fade, the snow drifts, and the story closes like a door at last. Sleep well, traveler. You've wandered far enough for tonight. And now, the journey slows. The storm of memory fades into mist, and all that remains is a quiet understanding that even the greatest powers, magic, ambition, love, eventually bow to time. You picture the world long after both men are gone. School children learning their names as legends, not wounds. professors debating their philosophies over tea rather than blood. The great duel that once split the sky now lives only in books, softened by retelling, the edges rounded by centuries of sleep. Somewhere, a single phoenix glides across the evening sky, its wings scattering faint sparks that fall like snowflakes, carrying both sorrow and peace. You lie back, breathing in the calm. The images dissolve. The castle, the duel, the rain. What lingers is a strange serenity, as if forgiveness itself has taken shape in the air around you. The world feels gentle again, and you realize that the truest kind of power isn't domination, or even victory. It's the choice to rest. Outside, the night is still. Somewhere in the distance, a clock strikes softly. One note, then another, echoing like a heartbeat. You let the sound wash through you, slow and warm, until it's hard to tell whether it's the world breathing or you. Everything that mattered now feels far away, folded neatly into history's long sleep. So let go. Let the story drift where it belongs, between dream and memory, where all great tales eventually rest. You've seen enough light and shadow for one night. The fire dims, the room cools, and your pulse slows to match the rhythm of the quiet beyond. The last thing you hear before sleep takes you is the soft whisper of wind through old stone. For the greater good,